Right by Them, chapter number 4, written by Esperosis and read by Ibis Podfic.
John put the last of his meager belongings into a box. He didn't exactly make a habit of keeping personal items on his desk. He always thought it was unprofessional. Work and home should be separate, he remembered thinking upon seeing trinkets and photos on his co-workers' desks. A bit ironic that he was practically living in the archives by the end last time around. Maybe he should keep more personal items on his desk this time around, he thought to himself as he continued to ignore David's lecture. At least then, if things happened the same way, being practically confined to his desk would be a lot less depressing. Or perhaps it would be more depressing if Tim and Sasha. John decided to tune back into David. I'm just saying, I expected a bit more effort from you when it came to preparing things for your replacement, John. You've always been so good with these sorts of things. So responsible and hardworking, David, the head of research, continued. But there are still so many loose ends you haven't tied up. Are you sure we couldn't talk to Mr. Bouchard about delaying your transfer for another few days? Just until you can properly prepare your work for the transition? John huffed a noise he wasn't sure was an annoyed sigh or a laugh. Elias would never agree to a delay. No, I don't think we can, David. John gave the man a tight smile. But I'm so very sorry that my work isn't properly settled for the transition. I suppose the 3 people you'll have to hire to replace me will have a rough start. Not to mention all the individuals that will have to actually start doing their jobs instead of dumping anything they didn't want to do on me. John continued to smile, even as his voice gushed with sarcasm. David went bright red and opened his mouth to respond. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a department to run. John smiled through gritted teeth. John speed-walked out of the room. Tim and Sasha weren't here yet. He had come early on purpose, just so he could try and avoid such a confrontation. But it seemed David really wanted to try to get one last thing over on him. Not that it worked. Not that it mattered. John quickly made his way over to Rosie's desk, finding the woman just as he remembered her. Sweet, bright-eyed, and much too nosy for her own good. He was glad she was doing well. The last he saw her, she was in the panopticon, and she wasn't physically hurt. He wondered if she made it out in time. He hoped so. He'd try and keep a better eye on her this time around. She deserved that, at least. Good morning, Rosie, John greeted her. Oh, she looked up at him. Good morning, John. Congratulations on the promotion. John's mouth twitched ever so slightly, but he maintained as neutral of an expression as he could. Thank you, Rosie. You're welcome, she smiled. Mr. Bouchard asked me to show you around the archives and to your new office. It's been a bit of a maze down there, she laughed as she stood from her desk. I can imagine, John replied. Thank you for showing me around. It's no problem. Rosie leads him down the hallways leading to the archives and down the stairs. John remembered the first time he descended the staircase. It felt like he was traversing into another world, one full of secrets and hidden things that his fingers practically itched to dig into. Now it just felt like he was descending into hell itself. It was dark. The main room was well lit, with 3 empty desks clumped together in the center of the room. But it felt dark. Rows of boxes and loose papers covered in dust were everywhere, with no semblance of organization. A carefully curated disaster. Rosie led him around deeper into the stacks and showed him the break room, then document storage on the far side of the main bullpen, as Tim would call it. Then finally his office. John tried his best to look and act like he had never seen the place before, even if he could map out every square inch of the place with his eyes closed. It was easier, tricking Rosie. Unlike others, he couldn't know he was lying. It was when they were just outside of his office that he felt then was the best time to finally bring up the sprinkler system. Rosie? He asked, trying his best to sound unsure. What is it, John? She turned around to look at him, her hand on his office's doorknob. John trailed off, looking at the sprinkler. Sprinkler. It's water-based, isn't it? I think so, Rosie asked, seeming confused. It's just that, John fumbled his words. He was a terrible liar. He knew he was a terrible liar. Whenever he had to come up with anything on the fly, his excuses always sounded completely idiotic, even to his own ears. Even when he had time to prepare, he would trip over himself and get his story twisted. But he really needed that damn CO2 fire suppression system. The water, he swallowed and tried to focus on just the fact. If there was a fire, all of the documents would be ruined. They're quite old and mostly written in ink. Huh, Rosie hummed as she stared at the sprinkler thoughtfully for a long moment before turning her attention back to John. I'll mention it to Elias, but perhaps we should write him an email about it as well, she smiled. Right, John nodded. Of course. Anyway, here's your new office. Rosie swung the door open and invited John inside. The office looked like a document-filled bomb had gone off. There were shelves lining the walls, and boxes and documents shoved into almost every available space imaginable. I'm sorry about the mess, Rosie laughed nervously. This Miss Robinson really left an estate, didn't she? The office was cleaner than when John had seen it last. He wasn't sure how to feel about that. She sure did, John grimaced. Well, I'll leave you to it, I suppose. Rosie smiled as she tried to suppress a cough. The air in the office was more dust than oxygen. Let me know if you need anything else. No, thank you, Rosie. John tried to straighten himself out. I think I'll be just fine. All right, take care. Rosie gave a small wave as she shuffled her way out of the room, quietly closing the door behind her. John looked over his office. It felt simultaneously like just yesterday, and 100 years ago when he had seen it last. It felt like home, like a prison cell, and somewhere so alien that he could have sworn blind he'd never been there before in his life. He'd accused the room of being of the stranger if he didn't feel the prickling on the back of his neck. He felt it before, of course, but only during statements, only when the eye stared hungrily into the depths of both his and the statement giver's souls, only when it made its presence known. But he knows now what to look for, what it feels like. He can feel the eye sitting happily in its place of power, excited to devour its new archivist whole and rebirth them anew. John carefully made his way over to his desk, and he had no idea which documents on the floor were actual statements. But he didn't want to risk anything. Besides, he's supposed to be concerned about all these fragile pieces of paper, even if the vast majority were completely worthless. He set his box on the desk atop another file box, stuffed full of documents, and fished out his laptop. He was about to set it down in the center of his desk when he noticed the piece of paper. Unlike the others, it wasn't yellowed or old. It was a crisp white, brand new, with crisp black letters printed boldly on them. John quickly scanned the page at the top reading, Head Archivist's Duties. This didn't really matter. It wasn't like this was a real functioning archive. Really, the only duty of his that actually mattered was the very last one. Transcribe statements from written to audio format. John's eyes lingered on the list for a moment longer before his eyes moved down to the last line of the paper. The signature of Elias Bouchard. He ground his teeth slightly as he picked up the paper, folded it, put it in his pocket. He forced himself to relax as he set his laptop down on the table and opened it. He needed to get used to dealing with Elias calmly. Letting the bastard in on his plans or his hatred would be disastrous. So he forced himself to think happy thoughts, not about how much he wanted to stab the man to death again. He opened his email and began writing to Elias, deciding it would be good practice in controlling his emotions when dealing with him. To elias.bouchard@magnus.ac.uk. From jonathan.sims@magnus.ac.uk. Subject: Archive Sprinkler System. Hello, I hope you are doing well, Mr. Bouchard. I personally am just settling into the archive, and am looking into the provided list of responsibilities you have left for me. However, I couldn't help but notice an issue that I feel needs to be addressed immediately. The sprinkler system in the archive seems to be water-based. As you are very well aware, we deal with very delicate documents down here, most of which are extremely old and fragile, and all of which are either written or typed in ink. If these documents were to come into contact with large amounts of water, they would almost certainly be destroyed. As such, the purpose of this email is to ask that the sprinkler system be replaced with a CO2-based sprinkler system as soon as possible. I myself never plan to bring any sort of ignition source into the archive, and I plan to instruct my assistants not to do so as well. But still, better safe than sorry, I say. Thank you. Jonathan Sims, Research Assistant, Magnus Institute, London. John sighed as he leaned back in his chair after having sent the email. That sounded professional enough. Honestly, he was having to brush up on his being professional skills after so long of just really not caring. He still didn't really care, to be entirely honest. He was too tired to care about stupid things like appearances and if he used the correct vocabulary in a stupid email. But he had to pretend. He had to pretend to care because everyone else still did. God, he was so tired. He wishes he could be back in Scotland back with... The door to his office burst open, ripping him out of his thoughts. Hey, sorry, you haven't seen a dog, have you? Martin asked as he stuck his head into John's office. John's brain immediately short-circuited. Half of his mind was still in Scotland, holding and being held by the love of his life, the man he lived through the apocalypse for, and the man he died at the end of it to save. The other half of his mind was very much in the present, staring at the much younger version of his beloved, whom he was meeting for the first time. John replied eloquently. It's a John Martin, a spaniel, I think? John opened and closed his mouth for a few times, dumbstruck as Martin continued to stare at him. I have seen a dog before? Martin looked confused for a moment before laughing. God, that noise was music to John's ears. When was the last time he had heard Martin laugh? Too long, and not enough times. He wanted to make him laugh again. He wanted Martin to smile at him more. He wanted so very many things. No, I meant in the archives, Martin replied. John's mind felt like a stalling engine desperately trying to start, but stuck as he desperately tried to fumble his way through the conversation. Archives? Yeah, Martin looked away, laughing sheepishly. I may have let him in. John continued to gape at him like a particularly ungraceful fish. No, not on purpose, Martin quickly continued. I didn't mean to, you know. We were outside making friends, and then I had to come in, but my hands were full, and you know the door's really heavy, so I had to use my foot, and then he just sort of like got past me. Martin was visibly sweating at this point, looking pretty sheepish. Right, John shuddered. Let's get the dog. Oh, you don't have to help, Martin replied. You look busy. I was just wondering if you'd seen him. John's heart lurched at the prospect of being parted from Martin so soon. Too soon. He wanted to spend every waking moment with the wonderful man right in front of him. It's, John stumbled over himself. It's no trouble. You should really get the dog before it makes a mess. Right. Yeah. Martin gave another nervous laugh. Right. I'm, Martin Blackwood. I'm a fellow archival assistant. He let out a nervous hand for John to shake. You're, Tim, right? John would compare the feeling to being stabbed in the heart. But he had been stabbed in the heart. And this hurt way more. He took Martin's trembling hand with his own shaking palm. No. John swallowed around the lump of throat. I'm Jonathan Sims, head archivist. Martin immediately went pale as his eyes widened in panic. John wanted nothing more than to wrap his arms around Martin and kiss his face until it turned a deep shade of crimson. It was a much lovelier color on the man. Mr. Sims. Martin started at his hand and retracted much too soon. John was still trying to memorize his warmth. Please. John spoke. His voice was touched soft. Just the honest thing. Oh, Martin replied, seeming to calm slightly. I'm so sorry about that. It's fine, assured him, desperate to provide what little comfort he was able to at the moment. Accidents happen. Let's just fix the situation quickly. Okay. Martin nodded, more to himself than John, and the two set out of John's office. It was only a few steps later that he realized he was supposed to be surprised Martin was here. Well, wait a moment, John breathed out, thankful that his poor attempt at a surprise would likely be misinterpreted as stress and nerves. You said you were an archival assistant? Yes? Martin stiffened again. I thought I was only getting Tim and Sasha, John furrowed his brow. I didn't know I would be getting a third. Oh, Martin tried to look anywhere but John. Mr. Bouchard said that I'd be, working for you. He didn't tell me that. Martin started, and John could practically feel the anxiety radiating off of him. John internally kicked himself. He wanted to question what Martin was doing here, not freak him out and put him on the spot. John was making Martin anxious and upset, and made him want to slam his head into something particularly hard and never open his stupid mouth again. It's not your fault, he quickly amended, desperate to placate Martin. It's Bouchard's. He should have told me you were, welcome to the team. John awkwardly patted Martin on the back. While his attempts to comfort were sloppy, it did seem to work, as Martin visibly relaxed, letting out a long sigh. Thank you, Mr. John. Martin smiled nervously. John nodded and opened his mouth to reply before a loud thump could be heard somewhere far off in the archives, and both winced. Hey, boss man, Tim called out as he and Sasha entered the bullpen. What's with the dog? Are we getting an archive pet? John huffed. Keeping a dog as a pet would hardly be allowed, Tim. Besides, Sasha piped up, we all know John would have gotten a cat. We do actually need to catch the dog, John cut in before Tim could reply. Right, yeah, Tim agreed. That thump earlier didn't sound very good. But first, who's this? Martin tensed up as Sasha and Tim's attention turned to him. Hi. You must actually be Tim and Sasha? Actually, Tim raised an eyebrow. Martin blushed, and it was beautiful. I might have, thought John was you, he admitted, his voice high and barely above a whisper. Tim stared at him blankly for a moment before bursting out into laughter. It's really not that funny. John felt a blush climb onto his own cheek as Tim doubled over, tears coming out of the man's eyes. Martin's gaze was locked on the floor, his face scarlet as even Sasha giggled. It isn't, John insisted, which only seemed to make the pair laugh harder. You thought, Tim laughed breathlessly, that little Mr. Grumpy over there was me, the amazingly handsome and extremely charismatic Tim Stoker. Don't forget humble, Sasha interjected. Martin sputtered. It's because you think he looks attractive, isn't it? Tim teased, his shit-eating grin firmly at home upon his face. John didn't think it was possible for Martin to go any redder, but Tim proved John wrong as Martin's face went absolutely scarlet, and he made sounds that more resembled a dying cat than a person. Not that you're wrong, of course, Tim shrugged. Our little John here really knows how to pull off the tired, dark academia aesthetic. John spun around to Tim, incredulous, but Tim didn't even look at him, only holding a hand under his chin in some mockery of being deeply in thought. He looked to Sasha, who was merely nodding along sagely alongside Tim. What the hell kind of conversation was this? Martin refused to look anyone in the eye. The dog! The dog! John practically shouted, putting an end to whatever this was. Fortunately, that did seem to snap everyone out of their dark academia discussions, whatever that was. Right, the doggy, he replied. And the four sprung into action, trying to catch the little hellion before it could eat any of their statements. It took nearly an hour, and by the time they were done, John was exhausted. He told the three of them to take a break for a few minutes and get to know each other a bit better. Then he climbed back into his office, leaving the door open, and collapsed in his chair. He wanted to leave the door open this time, he decided. The last time around, his door was always shut. What was a barricade between him and everything else? A wall between him and who and what he loved. He didn't want that anymore. He couldn't take it anymore. The only time his door would be shut would be for statements, he decided. He glanced at his laptop, still sat on his desk, and noted he had received a reply from Elias. Due to the constant repetitions of the section, we will simply be reducing the formatting to John from Elias, and this will continue. To John from Elias. Subject, replying to archival sprinkler system. Greetings, John. I'm glad to hear that you're settling into your new position and that the list I printed out for you was helpful. You seemed a tad nervous yesterday, so I thought the immediate direction would help ease your mind. I do plan on meeting with you later to discuss your duties with more detail. As for the sprinkler system, you make a good point about the risk to the documents if the fire suppression system would ever need to be set off. However, it never has needed to for nearly 200 years, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. Because of this, I'm a bit hesitant to change the entire system so suddenly. This is a very old building, and the cost would be considerable, so you can see why I have my reservations. However, I must say that your concern does quite reassure me that you were the right man for the job, as even on your first day, you're already showing such dedication and concern over the safety of the statement. Speaking of your position, however, I couldn't help but notice you've forgotten to change your email signature. I'm sure you've been quite busy this morning, so it'll likely slip your mind, but I would suggest fixing that before emailing anyone else. Also, please call me Elias. Sincerely, Elias Bouchard, head of the Magnus Institute, London. John resisted the urge to write a simple reply of, how about you go fuck yourself? Instead, he took a deep breath, counted to 5, and fixed his email signature before writing out his reply. To Elias, from John, subject, reply. I suggest your reservations over making such a drastic change, but I assure you that it's quite necessary. While it's true, there hasn't been a fire in the archives for nearly 200 years, that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. Accidents happen all the time, Elias. For example, a dog slipped into the archives just this morning. I can and will take all precautionary measures I can to keep the documents safe, but in my opinion, an ounce of preservation, such as CO2 fire suppression systems, is worth a pound of cure. The cost is considerable, yes, but these documents are invaluable and irreplaceable. Also, as an aside, in our meeting yesterday, it was agreed that I would have Timothy Stoker and Sasha James as my archival assistants. However, upon arriving here this morning, I have found a third assistant in the form of Martin Blackwood, who told me you transferred him here just yesterday. I want to be clear. I am not complaining about Martin Blackwood. I am simply surprised and confused as to why he's here, and why I wasn't informed he would also be my assistant. Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. John immediately stands from his computer after sending the email, not wanting to think about Elias for another moment. He rounded his desk carefully. Then he decided to pick up the documents scattered all over his floor so he could at least walk around his office. Soon he had an armful of random assorted documents in a clean floor. He sighed and walked out of his office and into the bullpen to find his friends and assistant. It seemed the three of them had just finished their discussion on who was getting which desk, with Tim getting the desk with its back facing John's door, Martin getting the desk directly across from him, and Sasha getting the corner desk facing the other two desks with its back to the back wall. "Hey, boss man," Tim gave him a two-finger salute. "Are those for us?" "Sort of," John sighed as he trailed off before looking to the other two, his heart leaping as he laid eyes on Martin. "Right. So, we can all likely see the state that the archives are in currently," John grimaced. "From what I can tell, this is unfortunately not a case of organized chaos, but instead extreme negligence on Miss Robinson's part, which is why our first and main priority given to us by Elias is to get the archives in order." Martin glanced nervously around, and Tim made a comment under his breath, his voice bitter. John couldn't make out what he said, but it seemed Sasha could, as she merely sighed and shook her head. Both sent a glance at the staircase that led out of the archives. John raised an eyebrow at the pair, but Tim just shot him one of his winning smiles. Well, whatever that was, it didn't seem to be aimed at him, so John decided to leave it alone. "We'll be transcribing the statements into audio format as we do. So, Martin, could you please find as many empty file boxes and manila folders as you can? Tim and Sasha, I'd like your help when it comes to sorting the files into boxes by year and recording the audio for them onto your laptops as we sort them. One of you can record in document storage, I'll record in my office." Tim raised an eyebrow. "Okay, but can I ask why we're recording them?" "Of course," John sighed. "Elias has asked that we transcribe the statements to an audio format for ease of access to students and researchers." Sasha's eyebrows shot into her airline. "He wants us to transcribe all the statements while we sort out this whole mess?" "That is how I understand it, yes," John grimaced. "There's like 50 years worth of documents here," Sasha continued slowly. "Yes. And he wants us to not only sort all of it, but also slow the process down considerably by doing audio recordings of every single one." "Yes." Sasha looked at John in disbelief, then turned to Tim, who was pinching the bridge of his nose. Martin looked concerned. "Again," Tim snapped, "I suppose we know why he picked John. Just give him some impossible bullshit task and watch him work himself into an early grave." Martin paled, glancing at John. Everything's quite all right," John assured him on instinct. "We'll just get to it then." "Right," Martin nodded. I'll find those boxes." He sprung up, seeming more than happy to leave the room as quickly as possible. John didn't exactly blame him. It must be quite the first day on the job. First, you accidentally cause a disaster, then you find out about the hellish workload your boss's boss starts upon you. He wished he could wrap Martin in his arms, but he'd have to wait. "Right," Tim snapped out of his thoughts as he clapped his hands together before springing out of his seat. He took the papers from John's arms and began to look through them. "Are these particularly important?" he hummed, flipping through them. "Honestly," John half-assed laughed, "these are just all the loose documents that were on my office floor. I figured if you're starting anywhere, we might at least start with physically cleaning the place up a bit." "Good thinking, boss man," Tim grinned at him, but John could see the tension on his face. All those years ago, he couldn't see it. How Tim covered up his emotions with bright smiles and humor. But now he could. Now he knew exactly what kind of plan Tim was carrying with him, what kind of anger. It hurt John to see his friends like this. John placed a hand on Tim's shoulder and looked him in the eyes. "We'll define Tim. We'll work together and figure this out. I promise I won't run myself into the ground." Tim stared at him in shock, even as John maintained his gaze. It was important he got through to Tim. This wouldn't fix anything, really, but John still wanted Tim to know that John could see he was hurting, that he was upset, and that he cared. Finally, Tim relaxed back into his easy smile. The tension that was there wasn't gone, but it was a fraction of what it was. "Geez, John, no need to get sappy on me," he grinned. "It's been a long morning," he said, let his hand drop. "I suppose I'm just feeling a bit tired is all." Tim laughed as he placed the documents on the desk. "Are your old hand bones screaming at you?" John trailed off. "I'm 27, he admitted quietly. Tim blinked at it. "Huh? Oh, wow, you're admitting it," Sasha gasped. "Huh?" Tim spun on her. "I'm 27, not 37, like I said," John clarified. He honestly wasn't sure why he did. Being more open with them, honest. It felt good after being so closed off after so long. Being close to them felt good. "You're younger than me?" Tim squatted before running on Sasha. "You knew?" Sasha just smiled. Tim put his hand in his face and as he groaned. "Right. Let's start picking up with those loose documents," John said as he began to collect the documents off the floor around the desks. Tim and Sasha quickly joined him. Martin returned 10 minutes or so with an armload of boxes and folders before quickly leaving to gather more. Soon the floor was clear. and there was a massive pile of empty boxes in the corner. As the four of them got to work sorting all of the loose documents into manila folders, originally the three planned on sitting at their desks, but they quickly realized there wasn't anywhere for John to sit, so the group opted for the floor as they sat in a circle. It was far from professional. He could feel his old self rolling in his grave, but John felt a small smile, like ever so slightly at his lips, as the four of them sorted the documents and labeled the folders. Soon, it was time to start recording the audio before sorting them into their new boxes, based on the year the statement was given. John stepped into his office, Sasha took document storage, Martin sat at his desk, and Tim took the break room. John suspected it was because the break room had a couch, but he didn't say anything about it. John wasn't worried about them coming across a real statement. They weren't the archivist. They would read it, find the audio didn't work, then come to him, and they would be completely fine. He, on the other hand, the first time he reads a real statement, there will be no turning back. He would slowly start to lose his humanity until he was completely dependent on them. He would turn into the archivist, a parasite that couldn't survive without the fear of others. Was he really ready to do all that again? Turn into that again? He didn't know. Well, there wasn't much use in worrying about it now. He'd just leave the choice for later. Choice, right. As if any of this was ever his choice. He looked at his laptop as he set the statement down to record it, only to find he had another reply from Elias. To John, from Elias. Subject, another reply about the archival sprinkler system. Well, true that accidents do happen all the time. If you were to start putting in precautions for every possible eventuality, you would be out of money very quickly. Currently, I feel the water-based fire suppression systems down in the archives is quite adequate, but if you still feel it's important, perhaps we can have a meeting about this instead of continuing to exchange emails. As for Mr. Blackwood, after our meeting yesterday, I thought about how much of a mess your predecessor left behind. You, Mr. Stoker, and Miss James are all incredible researchers, but I don't think any of you have worked on indexing or filing. Mr. Blackwood, however, did wonderfully with those things in the library, so I feel he would be a fantastic addition to your team. I thought I sent you an email about it yesterday, but I suppose it must have gotten lost. Also, pardon me, but did you say that a dog got into the archives? Elias Bouchard, head of Magnus Institute, Magnus Institute, London. John really didn't want to have that meeting with Elias, but he needed those damn CO2 sprinklers, damn it. To Elias from John. Subject, reply. Archival sprinkler system. Perhaps it's for the best. I'll come up to see you the first thing tomorrow morning. For now, my assistants and I are working on making some headway with the current filing system. As for the dog, it's been removed. There was no damage. Jonathan sins. It was short, but John genuinely couldn't be asked to write out something longer. He sighed and threw his head back for a few moments before sitting back up and getting to work recording the fake statements, even if it felt like a massive waste of time. It took 2.5 hours for Tim to stick his head into John's office. "Hey, boss man, there's something weird going on with one of the statements," he laughed nervously, and John felt his heart drop. "What's wrong?" Well, Tim opened the door fully before standing directly in the doorframe. "I tried recording it, like you said, but then I played it back. It was just..." Tim waved his hands around a bit. "Completely unintelligible, just electronic scratching for the entire time. Really weird." But that sounds strange, John swallowed hard. "So I think it's just my computer, right?" Tim continued, "even though it's been working before. But Sasha and Martin tried it, and it's the same thing." John nods, and he doesn't know what statement it was, but he could guess. The anglerfish. "Do you want to try it, or..." Tim holds up the folder. John sighed. "I can try, but if it didn't work for you three, I'll try it." He gave a tight smile, and Tim walked over and handed it to him. "Let me know how it goes." Tim walked backward out of the room. John sighed and looked down at the statement as Tim shut the door once more. He was right. John sighed and began to read, the words bitterly familiar on his tongue. It didn't feel like reading a statement. He knew it wouldn't until he read it properly, with a tape recorder. Still, it settled in his stomach like a stone, and he was almost glad to hear the hell screeching from his laptop when he played it back. He sighed once more and walked out of his office. As he entered, it seemed the three of them were awaiting his verdict, but based on the looks on their faces, they also heard the unholy ratchet that burst from his laptop. "Right," John sighed. "I'm not quite sure what to do with this, admittedly. It seems it refuses to be recorded on any of our laptops." "Should we, Martin piped up, "just skip them?" Martin suppressed a wince. He would love to just skip the statements, ignore them, and write them off. but he would imagine how irritated that would make Elias, and that's something he wanted to avoid. Besides, he needed to read them. Just put it to the side for now, John replied. If you come across any more like that, just put them in a pile. I have a meeting with Elias tomorrow morning. I'll bring up the issue then, see if he has any ideas. You have a meeting with Elias tomorrow? Sasha asked. Yes, John confirmed, and Martin suddenly looked very nervous. Tim and Sasha exchanged a glance. It's just about some of my duties as head archivist, as well as the sprinkler system, and, well, now this, I suppose. The sprinkler system? Tim asked. Something wrong with it? It's, John fumbled a bit. Well, it's a water-based. Is that bad? Martin asked, and Sasha, on the other hand, seemed to understand immediately what he was getting at. You're right, Sasha looked at the sprinklers. If they went off, all the documents would be completely destroyed. Right, John nodded, reassuring himself. I wanted to talk to him about the possibility of getting them replaced by a CO2-based suppression system. I know the government gives grants for better fire safety systems when it comes to old buildings like this, Sasha told them. I can look up what kinds of grants we might be eligible for if that helps. John sighed in relief. That would actually help immensely, Sasha. Cost was one of the big points of contention in my email exchange with Elias about this. I can help with getting the grants once we've got double bosses. Go ahead, Tim offered. Thank you, Tim. I can make tea, Martin burst out, causing everyone's attention to turn to him. He quickly went scarlet. I can make everyone tea. That sounds fantastic. Thank you, Martin. John resisted the urge to melt into a puddle where he stood. Some of Martin's tea sounded heavenly at the moment. Yeah, thanks, Marta. Tim grinned at him. That would be lovely. Sasha smiled encouragingly at him. Martin seemed to visibly relax and smile back. So, how do you all take it? John was right. The tea was heavenly.
The end.